Inflation has been going crazy. So today we're going to be talking about inflation. And, the godfather of value investing, Warren Buffett himself, we got a couple videos that we're going to take a look at and we're going to run it and go from there. So without further ado, we're going to talk about how to make money. How to make money during inflation. So let's check this out.
Are you seeing signs of inflation beginning to increase?
We're seeing very substantial inflation. It's very interesting. I mean, we're raising prices. People are raising prices to us. It's being accepted. I mean, it's not.
Inflation is a big concern for everyone right now. Individuals, companies, investors, politicians.
Oh, and before we go deep, pause. This video was shot I want to say January 2022. So it's kind of interesting because he definitely predicted this. Should have listened to him.
Inflation has been a big worry and topic of conversation for the last year to 18 months or so. In this video, we're going to be going through a hierarchy of different investing categories and how they rank in periods of inflation. All of this according to Warren Buffett, who at 91 years old knows a thing or two about inflation because he's lived through it. I went through hours of interviews of Warren Buffett when researching for this video. All I ask in exchange is for you to hit that like button. Seriously, that's all.
You see what I put. Hit the like
Okay, and
button.
maybe subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. Now let's get into the video. The worst investment to have during a period of inflation is cash. Warren Buffett isn't the only investor that doesn't like holding cash during inflation.
But it's so interesting because right now everything is crashing except for if you owned a home. So I don't know, should we be holding cash? Should we be dollar cost averaging in? Because I don't know. You putting that money in the market, it's continuing to go down.
Fellow billionaire Ray Dalio has also been vocal about his dislike of cash with the very memorable and kind of catchy quote, "Cash is trash." This is because during times of inflation, cash that you have sitting in a savings account or in your dresser dorm at home is becoming worth less and less every day, every week, every month, and every year.
Not to keep stopping, but the market's going down. So if you had your money in the market, I'm 100% sure it'd be going down a lot faster. Trust me, I know.
Biggest takeaways I want you to have from this video is that you as an investor need to think about your investment returns in what is referred to as real terms. The math behind calculating your real return on an investment is simple. Let's say your investments returned you 10% a year. That's great, right? Not so fast. It really depends on what the inflation rate is. In order to calculate the real return on your investments, you need to subtract out the impact of inflation. So if inflation is 7% and your investments return 10% that year, your real return is only 3%.
So used to be about 2%. That's the normal. 2 to 3% was the normal rate until the pandemic.
Not nearly as exciting, right? This is why cash is at the bottom of this hierarchy because your return on holding cash is essentially zero. Holding cash over a long period of time allows the impacts of inflation to work against you.
So basically what they're saying is, if you had just straight cash, you would have lost 7%. So if you had $100,000 last year, it's only worth $93,000 this year, which to me doesn't sound bad when you got a whole bunch of, markets. The market is crashed and a lot of people's positions are down 60 to 70%. So it's quite interesting.
Above cash on the hierarchy is fixed interest rate bonds. These investments are generally considered very safe by conventional investing wisdom, but Buffett would make the argument that these investments aren't really all that safe when you factor in the impact of inflation. Let me explain what I mean. The current yield on a 10-year U.S. government bond is around 1.8% as of the making of this video. This means that if you were to purchase a 10-year government bond today, you would effectively lock in a 1.8% annual return every year for the next decade. Let's say that inflation averages 4% over the next decade, which isn't necessarily a stretch given that the most recent inflation report
and it's still 1.8. Oh, my bad. No, it's 3% right now.
had
The
inflation
10-year treasury.
at 7%. With 4% inflation, this means you would have an annual real return of negative 2.2% after you factor in the impact of inflation on your return. Now, this is still better than just holding cash, but it is still a long way from the best.
If we dropped $1 million of cash into every household in the United States today, everybody would feel very good, except the people that invested in things that were denominated in dollars.
Exactly.
It's important to note that people that own fixed-rate debt, like government bonds, lose during times of inflation. On the flip side, people that borrow money in a long-term structure at a fixed rate are winners during inflation.
So that's the only thing that I like about this whole inflation thing is I have some student loans. And if you're a person with student loans, especially in the situation where Biden he froze the student loans for all of those years. So say you owed, we'll just use $100,000. Say you owed $100,000 on your student loan debt, and you haven't paid in the last 2 years. Basically, you just made, so first year was $8,000, so now your debt was worth $92,000 technically, and then the second year you take another 8% from the $92,000, and then we go from there. But the thing that's so interesting about it is people don't generally see it, because with inflation, like, I mean, you see gas prices. It was $2 for a gallon last year. Now it's like, I just pumped and it was $4.75.
An example of this would be people that use a mortgage to buy a property. In December 2020, I purchased a house. I was able to lock in a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 2.8%. This means that my interest rate is going to stay the same for the next 30 years. My mortgage payment is also going to be the exact same for 30 years. This is a great place to be in during times of inflation. This is because inflation eats away at the value of the mortgage debt month after month and year after year. As inflation makes each dollar worth less and less, I get to repay my mortgage debt with devalued dollars.
If you own a home, though, with a very large mortgage and you have incredible inflation, it wipes out the mortgage, and you've still got the home. I mean, it just...
In Weimar, Germany, they gave you the mortgage back at the end.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. That's the one thing they did right.
Next up on this hierarchy is what Buffett...
The home that I lived in, I grew up in, I think my father said my grandmother bought it for $500, and now it's worth a lot of money, because we live in Manhattan. Well, they live in Manhattan. I don't live in Manhattan.
But refers to as unproductive assets. These are things like gold, silver, and other precious metals. Now, these aren't terrible to own during a period of inflation, because all else being equal, as the price for everything else rises, these things should at least keep up with inflation, in theory. However, these unproductive assets also won't likely increase your purchasing power either.
Right.
Let's listen to Warren Buffett explain this.
He hates this.
I would say this about gold.
Hates gold.
If you took all of the gold in the world, it would roughly make a cube 67 feet on a side. So if you took all the gold in the world, we could have a cube that went down there.
And he's going to probably say, this is what he usually says, and this is live, would you rather have all of that gold, or would you rather have a bunch of farmland? Let's see if I'm right.
67 feet, 67 feet high, and that would be the whole thing. Now, for that same cube of gold, it would be worth, at today's market prices, about $7 trillion. That's probably about a third of the value of all the stocks in the United States. So you could have a choice of owning a third of all the stocks in the United States, or you could have a choice of owning that little block of gold, which can't do anything but kind of shine there and make you feel like Midas or Croesus or something of the sort. Now, for $7 trillion, there are roughly 1 billion acres of farmland in the United States.
What'd I say? I'm a real OG follower of Warren Buffett.
They're valued at about $2.5 trillion. It's about half the continental United States is farmland. You could have all of the farmland in the United States. You could have about 7 Exxon Mobils, and you could have $1 trillion of walking around money. And if you offered me the choice of looking at some 67-foot cube of gold and looking at it all day, maybe touching it, and fondling it occasionally, and then saying, do something for me, and it says, I don't do anything, I just stand here and look pretty. And the alternative to that was to have all the farmland in the country, everything, cotton, corn, soybeans, 7 Exxon Mobils, just think of that. Add $1 trillion of walking around money. Maybe call me crazy, but I'll take the farmland and the Exxon Mobils.
Let's move on to the next category of investments in our inflation hierarchy. Now, we as investors don't just want to keep up with inflation. We want investments that can outperform inflation and that produce a real return for us.
That's what I was thinking.
Here's where
Stock
what Warren
market
Buffett refers to as productive assets enters the picture. Now, we all know that Warren Buffett made his fortune buying stocks and entire businesses. But according to Buffett, not all businesses are created equal. Next up in the inflation hierarchy is productive assets, average businesses. Average businesses have a couple of characteristics, one of which is that these types of businesses require a ton of additional capital, which is just a fancy word for cash, to keep operating.
Unfortunately, most businesses will not come out well in real terms during inflation. their earnings may go up a fair amount over time, but they're compelled to put more and more dollars into the business just to stay in the same place.
And this is the point we're at right now. Like, you see, when it comes to the stock market right now, you have a lot of businesses that overall their earnings are increasing, but their earnings are only increasing because they've raised the prices on everything. But the problem with that is $4.75 for a gallon of gas is a lot of money. Like, I put $30 in my tank because I'm going to drive to Long Island today, and I'm going to get it for like 60 cents cheaper. But it was $30 to fill up a quarter of my tank versus last year when it was $30 to fill up the whole tank. Now I got to spend almost $100, and eventually people are just going to stop going places. And the same thing with like things like, I don't know, like laptops and things that you don't necessarily need to survive. When the prices continue to go up, because if they do continue to go up, people won't be able to afford to buy stuff. And if people can't buy stuff, then the businesses are going to have no choice but to lower the prices. And then there's going to be this squeeze because, you know, the businesses are still paying extra money for shipping stuff and extra money for equipment. And they were planning to just pass that along to the customers. But if the price is too high and the customers won't buy, they have no choice but to lower it. And the problem with that, because in between here is profit, if they continue, some of these businesses are running on like small profit margins. So if they continue to shrink, now they're in the process of losing money, and businesses will start to go out of business, and then people will start to lose their jobs. And then if people lose their jobs, people will start to panic and save more money and stop buying stuff. So we're in a really interesting situation right now, which is why a lot of people are saying, you know, we're at the start of a recession and this might go on for a long time. So it's pretty interesting.
And, you know, the worst kind of a business is one that makes you put more money on the table all the time and doesn't give you greater earnings. So
here's a simplified example using a real company that will hopefully prove the point. United Rentals, ticker symbol URI, is the world's largest equipment rental company. They have a pretty simple business model. United Rentals buys equipment typically used in construction projects. So things like bulldozers, portable restrooms, and heavy-duty trucks. United Rentals then turns around and rents out that equipment to construction projects over the short term, usually the length of the project. Obviously, this equipment that the company United Rentals rents to its customers doesn't last forever and needs to be replaced every few years or so. Let's say for simplicity purposes, each bulldozer the company buys costs $1 million to purchase, and let's say over the lifetime of that bulldozer, it can be rented out to customers and generate $1.2 million in sales for the company. That's a nice $200,000 profit.
It's not bad.
But let's just say for the sake of this example, inflation is 20%. This means that the next time the company goes to buy another bulldozer to replace the existing one, the company has to spend $1.2 million.
Yeah.
See what's happening here? The company isn't able to take any money from the business in the form of profits. All the money that United Rentals is earning in profits has to be poured right back into the business in order to purchase new equipment to replace the old equipment. Now, I don't expect inflation to be anywhere near 20%, hopefully, and United Rentals is a great company. But this example demonstrates the challenge that capital-intensive businesses face during periods of inflation. One quick story before we move to the next characteristic of businesses that you want to avoid during inflation. Warren Buffett's partner and friend Charlie Munger had this quote that sums up what I explained pretty well.
Charlie, why your eye look like that? Never mind. You rich. Let me shut up. Or you buy me.
Oh.
And that was the R word. You can't buy me, you know. My ancestors. Yeah. No.
There are two categories of good businesses. One is the business where the whole reported profit just sits there in surplus cash at the end of the year. And you can take it out of the business and the business will do just as well without the cash as it would have if it stayed in the business. The second business is one that reports a profit, but there's never any cash. It reminds me of the used construction equipment business of my old friend. And he used to say, in my business, every year you make a profit, and there it is, sitting in the yard. And there are an awful lot of businesses like that where to just keep going, to stay in place, there's never any cash.
That's like restaurants. The reason why restaurants fell at such a high rate is because, first of all, everybody thinks they can cook and everybody thinks that they can run a restaurant. And in college, I was a server. It's one of the toughest businesses to run because the profit margins are so thin, and, you know, something small like a hair being in your food sends food back, and then dealing with customers. It's just a lot.
The next trait of average businesses that you want to avoid are businesses that don't have what is referred to as pricing power. The best way to explain what I mean by companies that don't have pricing power is to talk a little bit about a company that does have pricing power. When I think of pricing power, the first company I
Apple.
think of is
Oh,
Apple.
I was about to say Apple.
Apple has such a loyal customer base.
Yeah, people aren't gonna go out and buy the Motorola or whatever, the Samsungs. Like, they have a loyal subscription base. And I'll think of another company in
That
a
many
second.
Apple customers will pay whatever the company wants to charge for its iPhone product. If someone wants a new iPhone, they aren't going to buy a competitor's product
Sneakers like Jordan, things like that. I mean, people can not buy them, but people, they prefer to wear Jordans.
just because it's cheaper. Contrast this to a company with little to no pricing power where pretty much the only thing the customer cares about is price. Let's say a company manufactures plain white t-shirts.
Right.
That is all the company makes, just plain white t-shirts, no design or branding. This company has no pricing power because someone is just going to buy the cheapest white t-shirt they can find. This t-shirt manufacturer also has no ability to raise prices higher than its competitors because the second its prices are higher than its competitors, people are just going to choose to buy the white t-shirts of this company's competitors.
Unless your t-shirts have higher quality and you call it Egyptian cotton and all this other stuff, then people might buy it. Or if you slap a logo on it, like, they might buy it, but that's another story. Because if that was a Gucci white shirt, it'd be probably $150, $200, which, yeah.
An inflationary environment is going to be tough for this company. The cost of materials to make the shirts are increasing, the cost to pay workers to make the shirts are increasing, and the cost to ship the shirts to customers are also increasing. The only thing that isn't really increasing is the price the company can charge for its shirts. Now, do you see why inflation is so challenging for companies without pricing power? Now let's move on to the next investment category on the hierarchy. Let's call these investments productive assets, great businesses. I know, very clever name. Here's another example for you. Remember how in the earlier example we had the business that spent $1 million buying a bulldozer? Let's say instead that our friend John here uses that same $1 million developing a software product that does something like make it easier for creators on YouTube to make videos. Just like in the earlier example, let's say that John makes $1.2 million his first year from that product, a $200,000 profit. Great, but wait, it gets even better. Let's say there is also 20% inflation in this example. This means that John is able to charge 20% more for his software this year than last year. This means that the $1.2 million John had in sales last year turns into $1.44 million due to the 20% inflation. But the great news with this software business is that John doesn't have to reinvest any more money back into the business. He already has the software, and while he may have to spend some money upgrading it and maintaining it, it would be a very minimal amount. This is the opposite of a capital-intensive business in the earlier example. This software business of John's would be what is called a capital-light business because the amount of cash John will have to keep reinvesting in the business just to maintain the operations and product of the business is very minimal. This means that John can actually take his profits out of the business and doesn't have to constantly reinvest his profits back into maintaining the business like in the earlier example of the equipment rental company. In order to find a business that performs well during inflation, you want to find pretty much the exact opposite of the mediocre business that we talked about earlier. You want to find a business with low capital requirements.
So anything digital, selling digital products, you can sell ebooks, all of these things, like people sell courses online, on YouTube. There's a ton of ways you can make money on I'll think of some more.
These are businesses that don't have to constantly be reinvesting large sums of money back into the business to grow. A lot of times these are businesses with very strong brands. Businesses such as Apple, Coca-Cola, or Buffett's very own See's Candies. Other examples of the kind of businesses that have low capital requirements are businesses that don't rely on owning a ton of physical assets, like factories or physical inventory. So think of companies like Microsoft, Facebook, or other technology-focused companies. Pretty much any software company falls into this category, as once the software is created and the money is spent in building it, the reinvestment back in the business is relatively minimal compared to most businesses. The other key element of a company you want to own during times of inflation is pricing power. Now, I will be the first one to admit, evaluating a company's pricing power is more of an art than a science, but here are some helpful things to think about. One exercise that I think is helpful is to think about how a customer would react if the company were to raise its prices by 10%.
So, pricing power. Let's talk about it. because I've wrote a whole paper on how Apple became Apple before, and they became who they are through the mutually exclusive. I think that's the name of it. It's been I got my MBA like 7 years ago, but basically when Apple came out, they first started off by just simply only allowing AT&T people to use it, and it became the cool phone that only a select amount of people could have. And then through they obviously had the iPhones, the iTouch, what is that called, iPad, all of these things, and it was just real exclusive. And then when they finally made the opportunity for everybody to be able to use Verizon, all these people, a ton of people flocked to it. And now honestly, I feel like these iPhones, they're not as good as the Androids and any of that stuff. They say iPhones are for basic people like myself, and Androids are for like high-tech people. Because the thing about it, if you got an Android, I probably wouldn't use it for most of the stuff that it can do. I probably don't even use this phone for most of the stuff that it does, except for taking pictures. I just need you to have some really good camera quality, and I'm cool with that because I shoot videos on my phone.
There are a few different reactions customers would have that fall on a spectrum ranging from don't care about the price increase, take my money please, to no way, I'm not paying that. During times of inflation when prices are rising, you want to own stock in companies that are able to easily increase prices for their goods. You want to avoid investing in companies in commoditized industries that struggle to raise prices even during normal times. I want to end this video with some important advice from Warren Buffett.
And the best investment of all, I mean, if you're the leading brain surgeon in town or the leading lawyer in town or the whatever it may be, you don't have to keep re-educating yourself to be that in current terms. You bought your expertise when you went to medical school or law school in old dollars, and you don't have to keep reinvesting. And you retain your earning power in current dollars.
The best protection against inflation is to invest in yourself. If you're the best at what you do, whether you're the best mechanic, lawyer, dentist, plumber, or accountant, you make yourself immensely valuable to other people. The benefit of being immensely valued in a marketplace economy is that you essentially get to charge whatever you want for your services, and your customers will be happy to pay it. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed.
So yeah, I'd pay top dollar for the best surgeon to do what I gotta do. Okay, what's this next one? This next one was about Warren Buffett as well. Then we're gonna go into some of the news of what's going on with the inflation and everything today, because it went from, in April it was about 8.5%, and now just checking today it's gone down to about 8.3, which is still high, but it's coming down, and maybe it might just be stabilizing. So we're gonna see what some of these people are talking about.
Seeing signs of inflation beginning to increase.
We're seeing very substantial inflation. It's very interesting. We're raising prices. People are raising prices to us. It's being accepted. I mean, it's not, take home building. I mean, the cost of, we've got 9 home builders in addition to our manufactured housing thing and operation, which is the largest in the country. So we really do a lot of housing. The costs are just up. Steel costs just every day. They're going up, and there hasn't yet been, because the wage stuff follows. I mean, if the UAW writes a 3-year contract, we got a 3-year contract. But if
this is also a month ago. So the last video is from January of 2022. This video is from a month ago.
If you're buying steel at General Motors or someplace, you're paying more every day. So It's an economy really. It's red hot. I mean, and we weren't expecting it. I mean, all our companies, when they thought when we're allowed to go back to work, at our various operations, we closed the furniture stores. I mentioned, they were closed for 6 weeks or so on average, and they didn't know what was going to happen when they open. And they can't stop people from buying things, and we can't deliver them. And they say, well, that's okay because nobody else can deliver them either, and we'll wait for 3 months or something. And sort of the backlog grows. And then we thought it would end when the $600 payments ended, and I think, around August of last year. It just kept going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. And I get the figures every week. I call, or Bumpkin calls me, and we go over day by day what happened at 3 different stores in Chicago and Kansas City and Dallas, and it just won't stop. People have money in their pocket, and they pay higher prices. And when carpet prices go up in a month or two, they announced a price increase for April. Our costs are going up. Supply chains all screwed up, for all kinds of people. But it's almost a buying frenzy, except certain areas you can't buy yet. You really can't buy international air travel, and so the money is being diverted from a piece of the economy into the rest, and everybody's got more cash in their pocket than except for. Meanwhile, it's a terrible situation for a percentage of the people. This suit, I haven't worn a suit, for a year practically, and that means that the dry cleaner nearest just went out of business. I mean,
Wow.
Nobody's bringing in suits to
Didn't
get
even
dry
think about
cleaned.
that.
Nobody's bringing in white shirts. The place where my wife goes, the small business person, if you didn't have takeout and delivery
You went out of
services
business.
for
So many restaurants that I wanted to, when I moved from Florida to here, that I wanted to actually visit. So many restaurants in the city have closed.
restaurants, you got killed. On the other hand, if you've got takeout facilities, you've done, same source sales at Dairy Queen are up a whole lot, and they adapted. But it is not a price-sensitive economy right now in the least, and I don't know exactly how one shows up in different price indices, but there's more inflation going on quite a bit more inflation going on than people would have anticipated just 6 months ago or thereabouts.
Yeah, and there's one very intelligent man who thinks it's dangerous, and that's just the start.
Inflation is going to affect you. It's certain we will have inflation over time. And we are following policies in this country now to stimulate things, which stimulate business, which are bound to have some inflationary consequences. And to the extent that we borrow money from the rest of the world, it would be very human on the part of politicians in the future decide that they would rather pay the rest of the world back in dollars that are worth far less than the dollars they borrowed. I mean, it's the classic way of reducing the impact and cost.
I didn't even think about that. The fact that the U.S. is in so much debt, if they continue this interest rate, I mean, that's crazy.
Of external debt, and we're building up a lot of external debt. I always find it interesting when politicians now talk about using the taxpayers' money to do this and the taxpayers' money to do that, and how the taxpayers are paying the bonuses at AIG. We haven't raised taxes at all in this country. Taxpayers are paying nothing beyond what they were paying a couple years ago. As a matter of fact, the federal revenues this year, which were close to $2.6 trillion a couple years ago, maybe more like $2.3 trillion. So we are taking less money from the taxpayers. The people who are really paying for the things we're doing now will probably be the people who
In the future.
are buying fixed dollar investments, much of it from the U.S. government, and who will find the purchasing power when they go to redeem those investments to be far less. So you might say that the AIG bonus is probably the Chinese are the people that are ultimately paying the most in terms of the loss of purchasing power they will have with their holdings of government bonds, U.S. government bonds many years down the road. But it sounds better to say the taxpayer than to say the Chinese are paying for it. It's an interesting situation. I read that comment every day about how the taxpayers are doing this and that. And I haven't had my taxes raised. You haven't had your taxes raised. They're giving me $250 back here pretty soon. Yet taxpayers haven't paid anything so far. And my guess is that the ultimate price of much of this will be paid by a shrinkage in the real value of fixed dollar investments down the road. And that will be the easiest thing to do. And if it's the easiest thing to do, it's the most likely thing to have happen. So you will see plenty of inflation. Now, the best protection against inflation is your own earning power. If you're the best teacher, if you're the best surgeon, if you're the best lawyer, whatever it may be, you will command a given part of other people's production of goods and services, no matter what the currency is, whether it's seashells or Reichsmarks or dollars. So your own earning power is the best by far. If you're the best journalist, whatever it may be, you will get your share of the national economic pie, regardless of the value of whatever the currency may be as measured against some earlier standard. The second best protection is a wonderful business. If you own the Coca-Cola trademark company, you will get.
So focus on your craft first. Like being the best you can be, best YouTuber, best
At a given portion of people's labor 20 years from now and 50 years from now for your product, and it doesn't make any difference what's happened to the price level generally, because people will give up 3 minutes of labor, 5, whatever it may be, to enjoy, a 12 ounces of a product they like. So those are the great assets: your own earning power first, and then the earning power of a wonderful business that does not require heavy capital investment. If it requires heavy capital investment, you get killed in inflation. And with those guidelines, I would tell you the best thing to do is invest in yourself.
Yes, the young man should become a brain surgeon and invest in Coca-Cola instead of government bonds.
If you discount it back, and you're discounting at present interest rates, stocks are very, very cheap. Now the question is what interest rates do over time. But there's a view of what interest rates will be based in the yield curve out to 30 years and so on. It's a fascinating time. We've never really seen what shoveling money in on the basis that we're doing it on a fiscal basis while following a monetary policy of something close to zero interest rates. And it is enormously pleasant. But in economics, there's one thing always to remember: you can never do one thing. You always have to say, and then what? Mm-hmm. And we are sending out huge sums. I mean, the president said it on Wednesday: 85% of the people we're going to get a $1,400 check. 85%.
It's a lot of money.
A couple of years ago, we were saying 40% of the people never could come up with $400 of cash. So we've got 85% of the people getting those sums, and so far we've had no unpleasant consequences from it. I mean, people feel better. The people who get the money feel better, and people who are lending money don't feel very good. But it causes stocks to go up. It causes business to flourish. It causes an electorate to be happy, and we'll see if it causes anything else.
We here now. It's causing some trouble, trust me.
And if it doesn't cause anything else, you can count on it continuing in a very big way. But there are consequences to everything in economics. But that is why the Googles and the Apples, and we don't own Google, we don't own Microsoft, but they are incredible companies in terms of what they earn on capital. They don't require a lot of capital, and they gush out more money. And if you're trying to find bonds that gush out more money from the federal government, we got $100 billion that's gushing out, $30 or $40 million a year, or whatever it may be, depending on the short-term rates. So that puts the pressure on, which is exactly, of course, what the monetary authorities want done. I mean, they're pushing the economy and they're doing it in Europe, even more extreme. And they're pushing, and we're aiding it with fiscal policy, and people feel good, and people have become numb to numbers. Trillions don't mean anything to anybody, and $1,400 does mean something to them. So we'll see where it all leads. But Charlie and I consider it the most interesting movie by far we've ever seen in terms of economics, don't we, Charlie?
Yes, and the professional economists, of course, have been very surprised by what's happened.
I'm surprised too, because the saddest part about all of this and the market crashing and all of this is that people are planning to retire right now. It's a lot of people that are currently in their retirement age, and 401ks are full of mostly stocks. And imagine your portfolio, which when I found out I had a 401k, I sold out of that immediately, because depending on the company you work at, some of them just sign you up for it. And I had a couple $1,000s in there, like tens. And I invested it, so it probably would have been the same amount as it is now. But my point is, I just turned 33. I'm not retiring anytime soon. But imagine being in your 60s, in your 70s, looking to retire, and half your 401k that you've been saving all your life is gone.
It reminds me of what Churchill said about Clement Attlee. He said he was a very modest man and had a great deal to be modest about. And that's exactly what's happened with the professional economists. They were so confident about everything. And it turns out the world is more complicated than they thought.
Keynes said it many years ago that it's an invisible tax that only one man in a million really understands. And it's a tax on people that have had faith in their currency that the government's issued. The best protection, the best investment against inflation is to improve your own earning power, your own talents. Very few people maximize their talents. And if you increase your talents, they can't tax it while you're doing it. They can't take it away from you. So if you become more useful in your activities, your profession, doctor, lawyer, whatever it may be, that is the best protection against a currency that might decline at a rapid rate. And the best investment, passive investment, I think is a good business. If you own an interest in a good business, you're very likely to maintain purchasing power no matter what happens to the currency. But it's interesting, in the United States, the value of the dollar since I was born has declined by 94% to 6 cents. Wow. So inflation is a very cruel tax on people who believe in fixed dollars, but things can work out pretty well even during inflationary times. I mean, if somebody told me when I was born, that the dollar bill is going to go to 6 cents, I might have said, let me go back. I'm not interested in emerging into that kind of a world. But actually, it's worked out pretty well, so I have no complaints.
Let's get right to Cheryl.
All right. That was a really, really interesting video. That's why I didn't jump into it too much. We're going to get into some of the inflation news, and then I'm going to let you go on about your day because I got to get back to doing what I'm doing. Let's see what... I forget what her name is.
Casoni with the number. Cheryl, what can you tell us?
This is
8.3%.
This is recent news.
Which is hotter than expected. 8.3%. That's the year-over-year headline number. Core year-over-year. That strips out food and energy. That's 6.2%. The expectation 6%. So again, these year-over-year numbers are hotter than expected. And again, we're watching the market. There goes the Dow. There goes the entire rally. All right,
Christ.
let's get to the month-over-month number right now. We came in at 0.3% month-over-month. That is hotter than expected. You strip out food and energy, and you're coming in at 0.6%. Again, hotter than expected. To repeat, month-over-month, a jump of 0.3%.
I just lost another 1,200 in crypto. Congratulations. I played myself.
Hotter than expected. Year-over-year, 8.3%.
Yeah,
that is hotter than expected. The 8.1% was the expectation. Core month-over-month, 0.6%. We were looking for 0.4%. That's hotter than expected. Core year-over-year, stripping out food and energy, 6.2%. Let me give you some context, guys. A year ago...
700, so that's $2,000.
You go back to this headline number, we're at 8.3% for April. A year ago, we were at 4.2%. We have doubled these numbers over the last year. Now, let me go back and give you some of the actual numbers and give you into the release a little bit here and to tell you specifically where we saw the increases. So last month, it was food, it was shelter. Now what they're saying as far as for the month
3%.
of April, they're saying the pressure came in. Shelter, food, airline fares, and new vehicles were the largest contributors to the seasonally adjusted, the headline number increase. The food index rose 0.9%. Even just month to month, the food at home index rose 1%. That's month over month. A slight decline in the energy index, which has been, as you know, rising. The index for gasoline actually fell 6.1%, just month to month. Okay, just to be clear, I'm talking month to month. That is not year to year. But again, if you go into these headline numbers, and I'm going to send it back to everybody for reaction right now, but we always look at, and I know we were talking about shelter, the headline number, the jump in
the economy tonight and gas
Let's see what this one is talking about. Who is this, ABC?
prices now at an all-time high in this country. Tonight, President Biden declaring this inflation is now his top domestic priority. A gallon of gas now $4.
Talking about this is today. Now it's a top priority. It should have been
$37. The president coming before cameras today, his explanation for why this is happening, pointing to the pandemic, the global supply crisis, the war in Ukraine. Republicans with their own explanation, and feeling it all are Americans who are faced with these prices from the gas station to the grocery store. Here's Mary Bruce.
Tonight, with gas prices hitting an all-time high, Americans like Flor Torres of Silver Spring, Maryland, are having to change up their lives.
I used to fill up with like $45, but Nowadays, that gives me maybe like a half a tank.
The mother of two who works 2 jobs is now picking up extra shifts just to cover the higher cost of gas.
Sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
President Biden today tried to convince Americans he understands what they're going through.
I want every American to know that I'm taking inflation very seriously, and it's my top domestic priority.
The president blames the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. He's already tapped into the oil reserve, releasing 1 million barrels a day, but it hasn't been enough to bring down costs. Now with
judging by the people who left once I started playing this, I think I'm going to skip to the next video and see.
Today's report from the government is expected to show that
them two. Who's next? Oh, this was interesting. I'll watch this and then we can get out of here.
Go ahead.
So this is the White House talking about the rise in inflation, excuse me.
Look ahead to tomorrow's inflation speech. Let me ask you to look back at some of the warnings that were issued last year by Summers and Ratner and so on. In retrospect, were they right that some of the government policies were going to lead to inflation?
I wouldn't say we agreed with them then, and we don't agree with them now. I would note that as it relates to actions like the American Rescue Plan, the alternative to not putting in place and advocating for the American Rescue Plan would have been the economy continuing to spiral, right?
So that's the most interesting thing about the whole situation, because the pandemic was so like, it's kind of hard, and I kind of sympathize with the government for that, because it's like you only had 2 choices. You had a virus that was like taking people out, deleting people, and they had a choice. Like they wanted people to stay in, but you can't tell people to stay in and not go to work and do all of these business things and then not pay them, because people still have to live. So it was like either give out this money or like send people out to delete, like to be gone. And that's the big thing about it, because it's like, how do you determine what's right and what's wrong? So they did. And the thing about the government is these are regular people. It would be like me being in Congress. We're just regular people trying to do what we think is in the best interest of the country. Now, is it right? You know, you only have the information you have at the time. So in hindsight 2020, if I even use that term properly, like anybody can look back and be like, oh, we could have did it this way. But if you did it that way, it would have been a different outcome. Maybe the numbers of deletions would have been 2 million, 3 million if we just said, you know, we're not going to give out any money. Everybody just go out and do this whole herd immunity. So that's the thing that I find real interesting about this, because I kind of feel for them. But at the same time, I mean, we're here now, so we need to deal with it.
We were providing assistance and relief in the form of checks to people who needed that assistance at the time.
Right.
That package also helped fund and prepare for a fight against COVID. It helped keep schools open. 100% of schools are open today, in large part because of the American Rescue Plan. It helps states and localities support and keep police, keep local authorities, keep local governments open at a time where that was in question. So we know, if we look at the recent inflation data, depending on which data you look at, 2/3 to even 70% of inflation data is a result of energy prices. A large part of that is the result, and Chairman Powell has spoken to this, and Secretary Yellen has also spoken to this, as a result of President Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the impact.
I think that's cap. I think that's a complete lie right there. Now, we're not going to go and act like Ukraine controls about 10% of the U.S.'s oil and gas. Now, I'm no economist, but 10% doesn't equate to this 2/3%, and they're trying to make it seem like this problem over here has nothing to do with this big problem over here, and no one believes them anyway. So I don't know why they keep saying this lie. I would have been okay with the first part where she said, listen, we either just explained it the way I explained it. Did you want people to delete themselves, or did you want to deal with a recession? Like either way, like there's going to be some poverty, and there was nothing that we could have done to prevent this. But, you know, at least people are alive, and, you know, we're going to get through this together, political, salute the country, and blah, blah, blah. Like stop stop trying to blame everything on this economy, because gas prices were going up way before. Gas was at like probably 360, 370 before the whole Crane situation. So it wasn't like the prices weren't going up. Like, come on now.
On the global energy market.
I just think that's crazy, and I hate when they do that. Like, it's so interesting to me, but whatever. Oops.
Those are all steps and impacts that I don't think anyone could have predicted a year ago. Go ahead.
So, thanks, Jen. So on that, the economy is signaling some weakness going forward. What's the level of concern? First of all, is the president watching the markets and the data coming in, and what's his level of concern there's a recession in the next 12 months?
Well, without, as you know, we don't really speak to or comment on the judgments, ups and downs of the stock market, or the daily movement of the stock market, I should say. Well, it's volatile. We've seen that, and we certainly monitor it from here. I would note that since President Biden took office, the market is up considerably. When we look at economic data internally, and when a lot of external economists look at economic data, they look at the fact that we've created over 8 million jobs since the president took office, that the unemployment rate has dropped to 3.6%, that GDP grew up 5.7% last year, the fastest rate since 1984, and also that household balance sheets are strong and businesses are investing in the United States. So we look at that base data, that data, as we look at the economy, and of course we continue to monitor as data comes in and as we see fluctuations.
What's his level of concern about a recession?
All right, I'm bored. Next, let's listen to Tom, because I'm gonna get out of here in a second.
Numbers, please.
Tom Nash.
The numbers, please. And here they are, our consumer price index for the month of April. Headline, expected up 0.2 is up 0.3. And do remember, this is a big drop from up 1.2 last month, which was the highest since 2005. If you strip out the all-important food and energy, expected up 0.4, a bit more, up 0.6. The high water mark here is up 0.9, and that was in April of last year, and that went back to 1981. And the Moneyball year-over-year headline up 8.3%. It breaks the streak of 7 higher year-over-years in a row, because in the rearview mirror we have 8.5%, and of course 8.5% takes us back 4 decades. It is a small reprieve, but a reprieve nonetheless. And if we look at core ex-food and energy year over year, same dynamic. It's higher than the 6% expected, Joe. It was up 6.2. 6.5 in the rearview mirror is the highest since 82. So we've definitely moderated just a bit. We see interest rates, well, they have changed rather dramatically. Rates across the board pretty much, and especially the long maturities, have moved higher from down 5 to up 4 or 5, over 3% again on a 10-year. And the reason is quite obvious, is that even though there is moderation, the moderations are small, but we do want to keep a very close eye on several things here. And the first, of course, is that food and energy really did throttle up to the upside. So when we looked at headline, when you stripped out food and energy, the fact that it moved up showed us that those moderated a bit in the headline number. Yesterday, what did we learn? $4.37 a gallon. That's a new high for gas. So some of that feature of energy prices moderating a bit may be something tenuous at best. I'll kick it back to the team to discuss some of these numbers. Well, we have some really eminent guests, but I got to go to Mike first, because the market reaction has been swift. We talked just a few minutes ago, Mike Santoli, about whether it was asymmetric risk. I think it was asymmetric. There was nothing that was going to make people happy, and it was not as much of a respite, I think, as we had hoped. The market immediately sold off.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the counterfactual. If we somehow got a light number, I think the market would have embraced it. The issue is in the previous days, last few days, you actually have seen yields come in. You've seen market implied inflation projections. They're imperfect measures, but you did see people moderating their expectations for what inflation would be down the road. So leaning on that foot, I do think the number comes as an unpleasant surprise. Now, you can still start talking about whether we're past the peak of inflation, but today.
So big components of core CPI.
Okay, that's enough for now.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm getting bored. I'm about to cut this off.
So basically 8.3%, still a 40-year high. higher than anticipated. The consensus was 8.1, a little bit higher, not as high as previous month. So essentially not as bad as it could have been, not as good as people anticipated, basically somewhere in the middle. The stock market, obviously, so far is not liking it. Let's see how it plays out throughout the day. My initial reaction is very simple, and I said it today on Money Talks. When you look about inflation, you have to consider if inflation will come down, what will drive it down? So there's a few factors driving inflation, right? Supply chains and supply of money. So you have this insanity right now that basically prevents the inflation from coming down despite the efforts of the Fed. So the Fed has announced, hey, the party is over. The cheap money era is in the rearview mirror. We're basically tightening up, more interest, less money, and it's taking effect in the market. You can see it. You can see the stock market. You can see the economy. It is slowing down. But unfortunately, it's not slowing down fast enough because on the flip side of it, we have a massive reopening. So this reopening is causing people to go outside and consume more. So now, because things reopen, people need more stuff. And there's a lot more stuff that are being consumed right now than during the pandemic. And on the flip side of it, we have a major crisis in China, zero tolerance policy, which means China is locked down. Factories are not producing. The ports aren't unloading goods. There's no export-import properly. China is basically locking down for at least a few weeks, maybe a few months, who knows. On the other side of the world, basically Russia, well, I don't know if it's the other side of the world, but basically Russia and Ukraine is going into what seems to be a long attrition war because neither side can afford to lose. Obviously, Ukraine has proven, and heart goes out to them. They've proven that they will fight till the last man.
They said this was going to be done in 3 weeks. This is still going on months later.
Will not give up an inch. On the other hand, Putin just cannot afford to not win. I mean, he's actually done if he doesn't win this war. So it's turning up to be this insane attrition war, which means that these two countries that are massive producers of wheat, energy, gas, oil, palladium, and basically all of these things are now going to go spiking up because of this crisis. I mean, nobody is sowing wheat in Ukraine, and there's the sanction issues. So energy, gas, oil, commodities are going up. Look at what's happening with the price of fertilizer. Another example. So massive demand because of reopening. China is basically out of commission. Russia and Ukraine, which produce about 30-40% of the world's wheat, not to mention other metals and energy, is basically everything is just right now creating a supply chain crisis, which is not even yet at its full max. So in that aspect, the efforts of the Fed are too little, too late, unfortunately. So even though it seems like inflation is slowing down a bit from 8.5 to 8.3, I think it's mainly optics. I think we end the year at a much higher inflation. I don't think it's going to go slowing down from here on. But hey, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, who knows? Of course, I hope to be wrong on this. But seeing the macro effects of everything that's going on, I'm not optimistic because ask yourself this question. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to the convenience store, when you go to the gas station, when you go to the hotel or restaurant, do you feel like an 8% increase in price or does it feel more? Because every time I spend money right now, it feels way more than 8%. And that just shows me that even the CPI number, as manipulated as it is kind of showing you where things are at. And I'm not optimistic, but hey, my initial reaction about it, the Palantir deep dive video coming up.
All right, guys. As always, appreciate y'all rocking with me, especially the ones that stayed to the end. I'm still trying to get monetized on this channel. I'm at like 1,000 hours of watch time and I need 4,000. So we're going to keep pushing at it. Appreciate y'all. Hit the like, comment, share. If you rock with me, I got a playlist that has all the videos. You can let that run and run the numbers up for me. But appreciate y'all rocking with me. Hit the like, comment, share, subscribe, and I holla.